I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm very happy that you're here with us for this very unique event. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to host our super guest lecturer, Professor Orly Lobel. My name is Judith Frankel, and I lead the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion strategy for our library services and products. At Ex Libris, Innovative, Clarivate, we're aware of the great opportunity that is embedded in technology and AI. But we're also aware of the fear that surrounds these tools, also in relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Bias can be present in any product, system, algorithm, including ours. Actually, I'd like to say that human tools such as chairs and scissors are not really different than technological products such as search engines, our library systems, and social platforms. They're in essence the same thing. They have a purpose in assisting people in different areas, tasks, but they're also mirrors, and they reflect our individual values, our societal values, even those that we're not consciously aware of. Thus, I believe the opportunity to discover, address, and fix has never been greater than today. Data is everywhere, big data, and we can see it, analyze it. Clarivate, Ex Libris, Innovative, we as a company have an impact on people, our students, many students, researchers, and library staff. They all might be impacted by our services, and we're committed to help create a better and more inclusive world through our products. This session is part of our educational DI programs, open to everyone, our employees and our libraries. Actually, everybody's invited to come to this session. I want to introduce Orly, and you'll have to bear with me because this is a superwoman. So a little bit about Orly. Orly Lobel is the Warren Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of San Diego and the award-winning author of several books and numerous articles. She's the director of the Center for Employment and Labor Law and founding member of the Center for Intellectual Property Law and Markets at the University of San Diego. Orly is a prolific speaker, as you would see, expert, commentator, and scholar who travels the world with an impact on policy and industry. A graduate of Tel Aviv University and Harvard Law School, she clerked on the Israeli Supreme Court and is a member of the American Law Institute. She also served as the military intelligence commander in the IDF. She has recently been named one of the most cited American legal scholars. Her two previous books, You Don't Owe Me, How Mattel versus MGA Entertainment Exposed Barbie's Dark Side from 2018, and Talent Wants to Be Free, Why We Should Learn to Love Leaks, Rates, and Free Writing from 2013, are the winners of several prestigious awards. She regularly advises governments, including both the Biden and Obama administrations, and private industry on issues of tech policy, employment, equality, and social justice. She is currently the academic advisor of Fiverr, a publicly traded global online marketplace for freelance services. And she also is a G7 representative of the World Economic Forum to the Japanese government on digital transformation, which is why she's talking to us from Tokyo right now. So it's pretty late for her. Her new book, The Equality Machine, Harnessing Digital Technology for a Brighter, More Inclusive Future, is a fantastic book. So after this session, if you haven't read it, you have to go and read it. This book has received a rave of reviews. Science calls the book masterful. The Economist selected The Equality Machine as one of the best books of 2022. And I'm quoting now. In a brilliant act of intellectual jiu-jitsu, Lobel argues that the answer is not to slow the technology, but to speed it up to solve those defects and achieve social progress. The Economist also writes in another review, The Equality Machine buzzes, one of the most persuasive proponents of a more balanced view. Kierkegaard describes The Equality Machine as a compelling, hopeful, enthusiastic, yet measured argument for technology's potential to promote equality across many facets of culture and industry. As you can see, a very impressive woman and resume. So this is a fantastic opportunity. I think you've heard enough from me because you're probably dying to hear from Orly directly. This is a new voice, a pragmatic voice, And I hope to learn and from this talk and adopt in a different way our tools, of course, aiming for a better world. So before I pass this to Orly, as Scott said, please put your questions on the Q&A. We can't promise to answer all of them, but we will try. At the end, we'll give 5-10 minutes for this. And now, Orly, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Judith. That was a wonderful introduction. I'm already blushing. And as Judith mentioned, I am here in Tokyo. I wish I could show you the beautiful view from here, the rooftop of Shibuya. It's midnight here, but I wanted to tell you that lest anybody feels bad that I'm up for this. I'm so energized. I was so waiting for this particular conversation. Judith and I have had conversations since we started planning this event, and I'm so impressed by her thinking and Ex Libris, all that you do in thinking about technology and inclusion and equality. So it's great to have this conversation starting. And really the book, The Equality Machine, is with its whole purpose to pivot the conversation, have more balanced conversations, and open up more directions and more visions. So these kinds of interactions with people who are so knowledgeable about research and tech and design and use, deployment of digital technology is exactly kind of the dream of any author. And I just look forward to that kind of connection and to building upon today with more interactions. I also, again, lest anybody feels that they're keeping me up at midnight, I have another Zoom talk scheduled at 1:30 a.m. So it's going to be a long, energizing day. And in fact, I'm really energized by just the whole day that was today, the World Economic Forum. It's a summit that is happening here in Tokyo on digital transformation. And in the book, in The Equality Machine, I take some time to compare between how different countries, different demographies, different communities, and even generations think about usage of technology and the path that digitization is taking us on. And then I compare Japan and Korea, who have been more comfortable with technology, to maybe the larger skepticism that we've been seeing in the United States and in Europe, and kind of thinking about what brought some of these differences. And you see it here in these kinds of conversations where there's the Japanese government that's thinking about how to integrate connectivity in every dimension and building smart cities and self-driving cars, and then the European speaker who is much more critical. So it's something that I think about and see now in action. So I want to tell you a little bit about the kind of motivation of writing The Equality Machine and my research and work on technology. And I have to say that this book is personal to me, but I actually think that it's personal to each one of us. I think technology is shaping our lives in so many different ways. It's being integrated in every dimension and every activity that we have in all of our relationships, with ourselves, with others, with our environment. And for me specifically, I have a picture up here. I have 3 daughters, and this is the first line of the book, which is, I have 3 girls, the middle one is bionic. And that line is kind of forecasting, or it's telling the story of my middle daughter being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was 13, and how for us, data and biotech, wearables, including her insulin pump and her continuous glucose monitor, has been life-saving. And in fact, the speed in which the technology is evolving is unprecedented. So specifically with diabetes care, just last year, the FDA approved a closed loop autonomous decision-making system between these different technology, different devices that are attached to her body and also attached in just like online connectivity with each of our Wi-Fi or each of our smartphones, her nurse's smartphone, my husband, myself, her sister. And the autonomous decision making is really kind of the big leap here, where it's through machine learning that the adjustments of how much to bolus for insulin, how much to correct, is done through an algorithm rather than human decision making. And again, we saw this up close on the improvement, the vast improvement that has happened in her life and in millions of others, children and adults' lives that live with type 1 diabetes. So for me, it's been a very optimistic story from that perspective. But there are many, many aspects of the way that, again, I personally interact with technology, and each one of us. I'm a researcher, as many of you are, really probably every one of us. I should say about the late hour also that, I'm such a book lover, and I think all of us here in the room, in the virtual room, are book lovers. And I think one thing that's common for book lovers is that sometimes we're also a night owl. So it's all kind of closed, coming to a full circle on these issues. I think that, I started researching all these different ways that technology is not only life-saving, but is the kind of great democratizer of knowledge, of access, of care, of well-being. And I have some images right here of robots that are serving now, and this is again much more common in the East, in Korea and in Japan. You see here images in Japan of a care robot that serves to help mobilization issues, and so on the upper image, it's a care robot that actually lifts patients. And then you see Paro. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this baby seal, and I think it's a little known fact that this little fuzzy robot that is a baby seal is actually also FDA approved as a caregiver to elderly homes. Again, it was developed in the East, but now during the pandemic especially, there was a lot of research on how the introduction of this kind of pet robot or robo-pet is helping with elderly care, with patients that are suffering dementia, Alzheimer's, also just loneliness. And one of the counterintuitive things that came out of the research, and this is why this is actually FDA approved, and it requires a lot of research and the whole clinical trial stages that come with FDA approval. The counterintuitive part of Paro, and I can talk about this more also on the education side, introducing robots in schools, is that it actually creates more connection between people rather than less. So it's not just that it brings value to the patients in the interaction with this robot, but the studies show that once it's there, the patients interact more with their caregiver as well as amongst themselves. And this is really, it goes exactly contrary to some of a lot of the writings about how technology is making us more isolated, more likely to just kind of be focused on the screen, or, interacting with the chat bot, and that fear that we will be less connected to one another. The studies are different on that. And this is actually something that's been very, very important to me. And I'll talk more about this soon, to get our facts right when we think about the promise and perils of technology. So on the upper side, we also see what I already alluded to, these robots that are coming into schools. I can tell you that personally, as a legal scholar that studies tech, I have had a lot of debates with people from the ACLU, for example, and a lot of the kind of privacy colleagues, privacy scholars that are some of my best friends, but they are very much tunnel visioned on how, when you introduce these kinds of technologies into schools, into education systems, and it has machine learning, and this fuzzy little robot has facial recognition. That's something like that very much scares the ACLU. There's a lot of fear that the data is going to be extracted, and the data is going to be extracted in some patterned ways that will do harm. But really, when you look at what these are doing, first of all, again, the studies show that these robot companions that have machine learning in them, they not only help children learn better, they kind of have the ability to personalize the interactions with these kids in the sense of some kids learn better from positive feedback, some need more of the modeling of fallibility. So the robot learns to make mistakes so that the child is also comfortable with making mistakes. There is kind of a big learning curve, but it's also that the kids are actually interacting better with the teachers and with their peers. And, I said that there's this assumption that I think is very problematic, that when technology is introduced, when data is being collected, there is a risk that the more vulnerable communities will be harmed. Here, I think it's an example of exactly the reverse story, where these robots that have been pioneered by MIT researchers, they've actually been introduced into schools that are underprivileged communities, the schools that have the worst teacher-student ratio, where the teachers are strapped for resources, are unable to give individualized attention to the many students that they have, unless they really have that support of tutors, companions that are technologically like advanced. And again, the empirical research is really robust on how much it improves the teachers' focus and kind of ability to tailor their attention and the children's learning. There are, of course, ways that are very problematic in introducing technology in education, and you may have heard some stories about, like, in China, the use of facial recognition to score very early children on, like, how much attention they're giving in school and then kind of track them in ways that just put the, you know, different categories or classifications on like the potential very early. I find those uses very problematic, and that's something that needs to be discussed in a kind of as through our democratic processes and understood that, you know, like how do we use it responsibly. But that's not different from, you know, the kinds of challenges that we've always had on how to create our goals, our social goals, how to really address the tensions and values that we have in democratic societies. So I'll say more about that, but here we see, you know, really positive examples of reaching children that and adults that didn't have access before, and really helping processes and goals of learning, of well-being, of care, of health. I do have these two robots here in the slide that are holding hands, and that alludes to two chapters in the book that are about our intimate relations, our love markets, and they are marriage markets, are markets. They've always been markets. One chapter is called Algorithms of Desire, and it's all about how apps that are dating apps are using machine learning to shape preferences to match people in search of love, in search of intimacy. And I, again, I see these examples of actually creating much more expansion of our network. So marriage markets, as I referred to it a moment ago, they've always been quite closed, and they actually are kind of our last taboo, where it's considered okay, or kind of like a very private space to choose partners along all kinds of lines that would not be acceptable in like the labor market, you know, along demographic lines. And there are actually good studies showing that with the right design of the interface between the user and the platform, people are become much more open to expanding who they're dating, who they're marrying, and there's actually cool studies that show that with different stages of the adoption of Tinder, there has been these leaps in interracial marriages, and there's different ways of like making race less salient on these apps, and again, letting people choose. It's not interfering with their ability to choose or their right to choose, but just nudging them toward kind of opening up their preferences, and being more open to shifting their preferences and increasing their expanding their horizons and their pools. There's also a whole chapter about sex robots. You know, we can talk about that later, but there's a lot of counterintuitive findings there too. And I show how it's kind of between feminists that is the debate about sex robots. I do have this special slide for all you librarians in the audience. You know, this is on the left side where you see this robot called Pepper here in Japan. These are libraries in Japan that are already automated by robots, but also in California, where I live, you see Elsie, robot librarian, in the Palo Alto City Library. And there are so many uses. I'm sure some of you are more knowledgeable about this than I am, but I have researched some of the automation that is happening in libraries and research and searches. And again, I look for a lot of opportunities there. So in the book, for example, I look at how machine learning has been helping researchers detect patterns of exclusion, whether it's with collections, book collections, images that appear in different books in different categories of collections. Or one example that I particularly like, it's from my field of law, is research that has had a real impact on how we do things. One study took all the transcripts of like the past 10 years of oral argument on the Supreme Court. And this is something that, again, it was just enabled by the computational power of machine learning, of seeing these patterns. And it showed in kind of very clear ways that during oral argument, the male justices are interrupting the female justices in much higher rates. And once this study came out, this was 2 years ago, I believe, it was done by 2 colleagues of mine at Northwestern. Justice Sotomayor picked it up, read the article that was published. And again, this was all done kind of using search and sophisticated statistical analysis that was enabled by machine learning. Justice Sotomayor, went to Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, and show this to him, and they decided to change the whole way that oral argument is done. So very kind of recent changes, and just the process of how you're not allowed to interrupt one another during oral argument. Each justice gets to finish like their whole 5 minutes of asking the first questions. So like real impact that comes out of searches and detection using these technologies. So having said all that, there's a lot of fear of what's happening now, and it's interesting. Like, it's the technology is of course accelerating in such speed, and the equality machine came out in October 2022, and then ChatGPT came out later, just a few months later, and now everybody wants to talk about AI. Everybody is talking about AI, and everybody, especially in higher education, is trying to figure out how will this change our lives, our students writing research articles, essays. There's I'm sure all of you in different universities have had sessions about ChatGPT and plagiarism, and ChatGPT and false references, fake references. Why is it hallucinating? And that's actually a really difficult question for the technologists, for all the engineers in the room to answer. It's actually unclear why it's hallucinating so much, but it is something that is on everybody's minds. I just came back last week. I was at a conference in Boulder, Colorado on generative AI, and we were trying to figure out a lot of kind of what needs to be done. For me, it's really important to have a public option and access to all the data, to have that transparency that's not just controlled by OpenAI, or the race between OpenAI and Google and Microsoft on who's going to have the strongest generative AI, generative pre-trained AI, which is GPT, right? But what I want to really emphasize, and if there's one thing that is really important for me in the conversation with policymakers, with the media, with with kind of public consciousness, and in thinking about what is happening with the algorithmic decision making and machine learning, and and AI is to ask clearly what it is that we fear, to articulate it, and to fear the right things and not fear the wrong things. So what I saw in my research, and again, this is a big motivation for me to be in this space, is what I would call the techlash in the past few years, where it perhaps started with a discontent against big tech, like the big five that have had all kinds of stumbles and wrongs, and there's no denying that there have been issues and some bad decisions on the part of like Facebook and other companies. But what I saw in the scholarly literature, in the public debates, and then the policy implications, the public policy proposals before the Biden administration, in California, in Illinois, like different state laws, and also in Europe, was what we can generally think about as the techlash, which is kind of a very, very focused and lacking of nuance of AI as wrongs, AI as harms, AI as risks, and kind of really balanced and lacking a balanced conversation. So I'll just show you some of the bestsellers that some of you may be familiar, because we're all book lovers here, that have shaped the conversation, and that my book is really a counter narrative too. So you see here titles like Algorithms of Oppression, now how search engines reinforce racism. And Sophia Noble is a friend of mine, like, and we have these debates, and weapons of mass destruction, how big data increases inequality and threatens democracy, technically wrong, sexist apps, biased algorithms, and other threats of toxic tech. Race After Technology, where the subtitle of this book is The New Jim Code, alluding to Jim Crow and technology as racially excluding. Automating Inequality, how high-tech tools profile, police, and punish the poor. So again, this assumption that automation is particularly harmful for the poor. And then this overarching idea and term that was coined by Shoshana Zuboff out of Harvard Business School, the age of surveillance capitalism. So that this idea that we're now our data is being extracted and we're all in kind of surveillance, rather than really thinking more, again, like more in a more balanced way of what it is that we're monitoring, detecting, extracting, using, learning from. And again, I think that we all know as researchers that knowledge is the great way to speak truth to power. It is the great democratizer of our humanity, of our society. And I wanted a much more accurate conversation about what it is that we fear, what are the risks, and what is the potential and promise. So one thing is that I saw how a lot of these kind of messages that were so blunt have been really having this perverse effect of dissuading a lot of amazing next generation of potential engineers, designers, policymakers, leaders, activists, from actually being part of the constructive conversation. And so I use a lot this term skin in the game. I say, you know, it's easy to be a critic. It's harder to make art, to make to innovate, to make tech. And the truth is, the story of technology has always been this kind of cyclical. It's being introduced, the train has left the station, you don't put it back in the bottle, the genie, to mix all the metaphors possible. It's here to stay. And when you actually take a historical perspective, you see how technology in its various kind of disruptive iterations, so various industrial revolutions, we've had similar fears where actually, literally, I'm looking at a train right now moving, literally people were very distrusting of trains, you know, like going themselves. And for a long while in different countries, there was a person that was just up front doing nothing, but just kind of to create that illusion that there is somebody at the wheel, and so that they won't be fearful of, so the public won't be fearful of the kind of self-driving trains. We're having similar conversations right now with self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles. I'll say something about that in a moment, but you know, there's been also with even like, you see this especially since I am an intellectual property scholar as well. You see this in every technological invention. It's kind of like the sky is falling, like the printing machine will destroy, you know, human creativity, like digital, the first file sharing will destroy human creativity. You know, nobody will want to create music anymore. Mixing will destroy like music and writing and art. And so you see, like with previous inventions, similar things, that like there's this end of the world thing, but it doesn't happen. And I think that similar things with Dali, you know, will we still have art? With you know, ChatGPT, will we still be like writing novels? There's always this fear of what will happen with our human creativity, with our jobs. Some of them are very legitimate fears, and we can talk more about this. You know, I've taken quite a bit of time in my research to ask, why are we attaching so much to full-time employment in terms of benefits and our like all of our social welfare in capitalist societies? I think it's always been the case that that has been problematic to tie full-time employment to reskilling, education, retirement, healthcare, you know, this kind of the American model that has spread broadly. And this is a time that politically we need to change that. But again, the train has left the station means that we all need to have skin in the game in designing these and participating in the thinking about the design of these technologies, in the deployment of the technologies, in the auditing of them, in the hard conversations about what are legitimate uses, what are illegitimate uses. Just saying like that we want to ban a technology, which is happening with facial recognition, which is happening with ChatGPT with certain countries. You know, like Italy halted the use of ChatGPT for a while. That is a much less fruitful direction. But even more than that, what has been really important to me is to have kind of a pivot of the conversations, and what are the the risks or the problems that people fear with automation. So as a behavioral researcher, and I collaborate a lot in my own writing with social psychologists and behavioral economists, it's been very salient that there are ways that we talk about automation that just are flawed and show a lot of our own cognitive biases in assessing like change. So the big overarching one is that we talk about automation in kind of absolute terms. You know, is it good or bad? Is it perfect or imperfect? Is it biased or like not biased or, you know, impartial? Without holding this comparative lens. So we have this double standard where we expect perfection from an automated process without, you know, kind of acknowledging that there's always some decision maker in the process and that we ourselves are, very much inflicted by biases, and the status quo is very much imperfect. So the easiest, I think, intuitive kind of way to make this, to flesh this out is when you see reports about autonomous vehicles in the media, like a robo-taxi in Arizona, like a self-driving Uber, got into an accident and there's immediate, like, it's unsafe for deployment. And of course, that's not the right question. The right question is it safer than the status quo, than, you know, safer than human driving? And that has to be the gold standard. That has to be our question in every sector that we think about automation. If it's introducing radiologists that are bots and then replacing, you know, like in doing mammograms, the human radiologist, the question should not be, are they perfect? The question has to be, are they outperforming the human radiologist? Are they more accurate? They're more consistent. They're just kind of better in detecting what needs to be detected. We humans have a trouble with accepting that, with understanding that we have this status quo bias, this like loss aversion bias, where losses loom larger than risks when, or than gains. Losses loom larger than gains when we're thinking about shift. But I think that it's very important for all of us to accept that not shifting to an automated system when it's better is a decision. So it's not like a, you know, being passive is not a decision. It's that too can have a lot of costs and a lot of exclusions. So if we have something that can benefit society, that can tackle many of the wicked problems that we're now facing. So there's so many examples, you know, we don't have time to go over all these examples, but in my research, I like look at automation to help tackle trafficking and missing children, automation that is tackling some of the biggest challenges of climate change and endangered species, alleviating poverty and ag tech. So, you know, like helping some of the, you know, world's most difficult places, produce more, you know, sustainable food, and deliver it to underserved communities. Healthcare, we talked about, you know, safety and health in construction and in transportation, all of those. So again, not choosing to shift is also a decision, and it can be a decision that has many costs of in like exclusion and in human loss of opportunities and actually loss of health and life and other very serious issues. The other way of thinking about comparative advantage, and I think this is again very relevant to researchers, is that you've probably heard this term, algorithms are a black box. It's like Black Box Society is another book title by my good friend Frank Pasquale that kind of conveys this idea that it's very hard for us to understand how algorithms are working, how they're finding patterns. Well, yes, it's hard for us because, I mean, we have to accept that part of their power is that they are, there's just stronger computational abilities there than any of our human minds. So we will not be able to understand the process of how they spit out some recommendations. But what's very important is that we actually, as humans, are also a tiny black box called our brains. And as someone who's been studying, researching, and teaching discrimination for a long time now, and I also serve as an expert witness in discrimination cases. I just testified last week in a major Me Too case. It's terribly difficult to prove, how humans make decisions, what led to biases, and we ourselves are even, about our own decision making, we're very, very bad in understanding what motivated us. So again, there's a comparison there, and the comparison is that even though it's hard for us to understand the process that went through an algorithm spitting out a recommendation, creating some patterns and how it sorts different data sets, what is actually much more easily tracked and audited is the outcome. So there's kind of a digital paper trail that can be audited when it comes to algorithms. So you see this, for example, in questions about the pay gaps in the labor market. It's been very, very frustrating for people who are interested in the gender and racial pay gaps in the labor market to see how stagnant these gaps have been. Just haven't really changed, the 80 cents to the dollar for a few decades. And what's been really revolutionary here is that once companies introduce software that 24/7 helps audit and detect changes, gaps that exacerbate, that start, being introduced in all kinds of ways in evaluations, assessments, and then pay, the software has been really the game changer here, that like in real time, rather than a one shot, once a year, there's like some auditor that comes in or reporting to the EOC. This has really been a way to change and tackle the pay gap. So really quickly, I just talked about hiring and pay and labor market. Very similarly, there's, with hiring tools, you can have these auditing machines that show like biases that are introduced in algorithms and those can be corrected. And the gold standards now for those kinds of algorithms is to introduce in a company 2 algorithms at the same time. One that makes the initial recommendations, and the second that constantly is auditing those recommendations. That's different from the resume historical experiments offline that were like done starting in Chicago and many other places, where there was just like one-shot detection of people making decisions that are biased, and then what do you do with it? It's very difficult to change an organization that way, of just like from the outside, showing that in an experiment that they choose less certain demographics less frequently. So I want to get to questions, so I'll just say the gold standard now is for algorithms to actually operate with what we call fairness through awareness. So rather than blinding them, actually giving them more input and then focusing on the outputs, auditing the outputs for differences. I'll just skip right here because I think I said a lot of this. So my final point is that I think that educators, policymakers really need to, leaders in the tech space need to focus not only on building trustworthy AI, but also helping people have the right kind of trust in automation. So not over trust, but also not under trust, not the like algorithmic adoration, as we call it in the literature, and not algorithmic aversion, but kind of a Goldilocks, let's get the right kind of trust. And the final thing is that we need more competition and more of public options. I said that with ChatGPT and generative AI, but I think that's true with everything. And that relates to my previous books and some of the work that I've been doing with the Federal Trade Commission. But competition policy, antitrust policy is tech policy, and it's really important that we have all that. But let me see, last slide. There we go. So thank you, and I would love to hear some questions.
Thank you, Orly. This was fantastic and eye-opening. I think it's a real different view, and we're also very good friends of Sophia Nobel, so we have to the scale, right? To views, and I think that's very important. We have some questions here that are related to the trust. Maybe you mentioned that the trust in AI. How can we put our hands? How can we trust AI when it's actually in the hands of big corporations? It has come in different. This question has come in different ways. I will just quote who wants AI being controlled by Musk, or the systems are actually part of private companies. So I think you've mentioned it in some ways, but coming from your field, how can we have more control in this and understand more? Maybe the ChatGPT is a good example because we really don't understand the source of the data that is coming. But how can we, as a society, feel more secure in the hands of these corporations that actually are providing these tools to us?
Right. Yeah. No, that's a key question, and I think that it's not a single solution. I think that it's a kind of multi-channel investment in that has to come from the public and from a lot of education. First, I think digital literacy has to be a national strategy. And again, I think that perversely, because there's so much fear, we talk a lot to parents, for example, about the risks of being connected. And again, or like kids being online, not to deny that, there's been problems with, use of social media. And of course, there's a value of being disconnected sometimes, but we don't talk nearly as much about how to teach children to make the right choices when they're online, how to learn to differentiate between the snake oil promises of AI and the better, like gold standards, the best practices. I think that that's a role for government and for civil society to kind of be a check on the power of big tech on this. So I talk, for example, I talk about having bias bounty civil society organizations. So think about like hackers that are always kind of using or being used by companies to find vulnerabilities of cybersecurity. And, there's a whole network of these kind of ethical hackers. We need something similar for hacking bias or giving bounties to bias hunters. And that requires investment. We need policies about access to the data itself. So companies claim proprietary information, or they claim their data as proprietary too broadly. Again, something that I've been writing about, how privacy is often conflated with secrecy, and companies use this idea of privacy to hide and conceal things from the public. Privacy has always been a sword and a shield. We need to have many more laws that require disclosure, and again, and investment and expertise on the other side, both in government and in civil society, to be able to check the data that exists. So all of those, I think, will build more trust. With ChatGPT specifically, there are ways, and again, we have to educate our students, first and foremost, and then all of us in all the spaces, to learn how to. This was actually last week in Colorado. We talked about this a lot, to learn how to use it responsibly and to push it to not hallucinate, to not do the kind of problematic things. And there are ways. So there's lots of kind of steps. That's why it's a chat. It's not like a one-shot. It's not meant to be a one-shot application. There are specific questions and asks that can be made to generative AI that takes out a lot of the risks. Case Text is one of the companies that does some of that for legal services, and there's many others. And I'm sure Ex Libris is working on a lot of that. But we all need to kind of have that toolbox in our in our systems.
Okay, listen, there's so many questions here that I won't be able. So I'm going to ask you a yes/no question, which I think I know the answer. Someone's asking if it makes sense due to what you've mentioned and the policy and all of the changes that we need to develop to ensure that the systems are serving us as we need. Do you think it makes sense to slow the developments until the policy is there? It's a yes and no question, so we can let you go.
No, accelerate, do test beds, do sandboxing, do experimentation that's controlled, but I don't think slowing down is really the solution.
So Orly, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful talk, and I'm pretty sure that everyone here has enjoyed. Again, we had a very short time for questions, so the chat is full, but we hope to see you again, and I'm sure that our community, our company for sure will gain from the knowledge that we've learned today. So thank you.
Thank you. And I am very happy to receive questions, there's my email, and continue the conversation and hear from listeners, readers. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you for attending.